then people won't, but people will still hear if I
People
have.
will hear just fine.
Just fine, okay. Because it's audience participation. Great, now how does this turn on?
Hold the red button until it turns on. Dop does stuff, but not helpful in this particular situation. It's not proper. Not that the knob doesn't do anything. It doesn't do what you want it to do.
Testing.
We're very informal. Well, good evening, everyone. Glad to have everyone here and everyone's joining us on the live stream. This year, for our 30th anniversary, we're writing a new Torah, and throughout the year, we're learning about Torah in all sorts of different ways. Torah has a broad approach to what we can understand the world and our relationship in it. And tonight, we're delighted to have student Rabbi Jules Ilian share about the Torah and the environment. So I'm going to turn it right over to her to start our learning.
Hi, everyone. It is such an honor to be here and to be learning with you all tonight. As Rabbi said, and as I think I know all of you, I'm student Rabbi Jules Ilian, and we are going to talk about the Torah and the environment. To give just a little preface, this is a tremendous subject and one that we could not come near covering in the course of one night, so this is just going to be a little bit of a taster of a few different topics, but I invite you to delve further into it because there's a lot. Second is, I hope that this is going to be interactive. I invite you to raise your hand. I invite you, we'll have some times when we turn and talk with our neighbors, but I know that I am my best learner when I'm interacting, and I presume the same for many others. So we'll continue. So this is our agenda for the evening. We're going to start with a blessing for the study of Torah, and then we're going to acknowledge the importance of trees, talks about themes of water, and then we're going to talk about Shemitah, which is one of my favorite things to talk about at any given time, the earth as a living being, and it's deserving of rest. So we'll start with the blessing for the study of Torah. I invite you to join together with me. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So we'll start with acknowledging the importance of trees. So there are a lot of stories of the importance of trees. We'll start with the story of Honi the circle maker, which many of us know. It's a tale we share oftentimes at the high holidays, the story of Choni walking down the street and he sees an old man planting a carob tree and he says, "What are you doing and how many years will it take to bear fruit?" The man says 70 years. Choni's aghast. Why would you plant a tree if you're not even going to see it see it flower? And the man says to Choni, "It's not for me, it's for the next generation, just as the generation before did for me." That's from the Talmud. So there's a lot about trees. So I invite you to, can we see this? Can we read this clearly? Brilliant. So I invite you to turn to the person next to you, pick one bit. There's so much to cover, and we only have so much time, so I invite you to pick one or two sources to talk about with your neighbor that feel interesting to you. And we'll take about 5 minutes for that. 30 more seconds. All right, we're gonna come back together. Does anyone want to share a little bit from your group discussion, something that came up, something that brought questions? Yeah, Jody.
I was sharing with God about how we could use, not just about, but we can make a difference now, and then years from now, when years from now they can look back and say we made a difference, and not waste the opportunity and do it now.
Oh, I love that. So the idea that we need to seize the moment and recognize the value in our labor in this time so that we're not looking back in the future and wondering what did we do. We need to set ourselves up and set the future up in sort of yes, yeah, and that sort of interconnects people. I love that. Thank you, Jody. That's wonderful. Any other groups want to share? But that's all right. We'll keep going. There are 22 slides. Some of them are citations. So this as well I find to be an interesting part of Deuteronomy, this idea of what happens when you besiege a city. So we'll start with the text and then there's a little bit of commentary to go along. When you are in war against a city, you have to besiege it a long time in order to capture it. You must not destroy its trees, wielding the axe against them. You may eat them, but you must not cut them down. Are trees of the field human to withdraw before you into the besieged city? Only trees that you do not yield food may be destroyed. You may cut them down for constructing siege works against the city that is waging war on you until it has been reduced. So we've got some commentary on that. I know that I was pondering the humanness of the trees and the lines. So Sferno talks about this. For is a tree of the field equivalent to a human being, capable of defending itself and therefore posing a danger to you? Neither is it able to surrender on account of the siege, seeing that this is so, even though part of its timber could serve as a rampart for helping you to mount an attack against the city itself. Since this will not be achieved directly by cutting down these trees, it is not proper for you to destroy such trees, as opposed to your being permitted to kill human beings in a city opposing you and endangering you. So we see here this sort of semi-personification of the tree, a bit of human attribute prescribed to it, which is an interesting comment on how trees themselves interact in times of war, not just in ways that we think of food, shade, etc., but also, will it help us win a war? What is it going to do? Is it a victim in its own right in wartime? We're not going to read all of this, don't worry. This just says Tu B'Shvat. It's one of the four New Years, which is exciting. We have an entire New Year for the tree. For the trees, we recognize as a people the value and importance in trees, so much so that we set aside a time to honor them in our community and their agricultural reasonings for it. But it matters so much to us that we do this every single year, and that it's become this important holiday, even though it technically is a minor one. Move on to water, water being the source of all life. So I invite you again to turn to someone next to you, and we're going to talk about these quotes on, pick one on the screen to talk about mikvah. There was just so much, I couldn't get it all, so we'll leave mikvah to the side. It's a whole different talk, but I couldn't not put mikvah on the screen, so one of the three. We'll take 5 minutes. come back. I hope that we've had some interesting conversations about the through line of water and the importance and the different ways that it shows itself in the Torah. We were having a conversation just now about the importance of water throughout the lifetime of Moses and the different touch points at which Moses was impacted and carried literally or metaphorically by water and the influence that it has at each sort of core moment of Moses' life, from going down the Nile to crossing the Red Sea, and then we'll see in a moment a little bit more. Water safety. So now we'll bring in a little bit of the modern. Well, first some ancient, then the modern. So this is Moses. And when they came to Marah, they could not drink of the waters of Marah, for they were bitter. Therefore, the name of it was called Marah. And the people murmured against Moshe, saying, "What shall we drink?" And he cried to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a tree, which, when he had cast it into the waters were made sweet. There he made for them a statute and an ordinance, and there he tested them. So most of the commentators that I read about were far more interested in the statute and the ordinances. I personally was interested in how the tree made the water sweet. What are the implications there? But we got a few commentators. We won't turn and talk, but we'll just look at the women's commentary for the moment. So they say, a piece of wood, the water became sweet. What might nowadays be considered magic and thus superstitious was believed to be efficacious in the biblical world. Judging from the Palestinian folklore, throwing wood into the water may be akin to a modern European homeopathic procedure. A piece of wood with bitter tasting bark removes the bitterness of impossible water. Move forward. But it's interesting these commentators are sort of pointing to miracles and perhaps chemistry. We'll bring some modern science in as well. I found this really interesting. I found an article about MIT scientists who are using trees to create water filtration systems in India, and they seem to have positive impacts, and they're low cost, and they're helping the community. So I love that this ancient idea that we found in the Torah has these modern sensibilities and these modern implications now that perhaps can work and can help our environment and have these sustainable outcomes. But it's an interesting bit of information, at least I found it to be. We got to Shemitah, which is my favorite thing to talk about. Shemitah is the idea that for 6 years we work on the fields, and the 7th year we let the land lie fallow. But not only that, there is a remission of debts, and people are given, indentured servants are given their freedom. And so it's this very holistic idea stemming from the land and then bridging out to every single community thereafter, impacting the animals, impacting the people who are dealing with dire poverty, and now they get remission of debt, so now they're not feeling that pressure in the same way. And so it shows, this farming practice shows the way that we can therefore use farming to move forward and to impact all different spheres. But we'll get to it. Okay. So we see this concept twice, first in Exodus and then in Leviticus. In Exodus, 6 years you shall sow your land and gather its yield, but in the 7th you shall let it rest and lie fallow. Let the needy among your people eat of it, and what they leave let the wild beasts eat. You shall do the same with your vineyards and your olive groves. So let the land rest, a personification of the land. So these I think are a little bit easier to read. So again, we'll turn to our groups and we'll take 5 minutes to talk about these comments. Rashi and even Ezra.
This means arrest in honor of God, not arrest for the Lord, as in verse 4. The Lord there shall be a strict Sabbath for the land to the same sense of these words. That's another the other one. A year of solemn rest. It's meaning because it's a year of solemn rest for the land, that is the land.
All right. We'll come together for just a second, but this quote, which I apologize did not get copied properly, talks about sort of not owning the land for the year of Shemitah, for the 7th year. And so it's the idea that we have the land, but really it's on borrow from God. And so I'd love to invite you to think about, what does that mean for us living in New York who perhaps feel detached from the land? How can we experience this little bit of borrowing from God? Where does our food come from? Do we think about that ever? But I invite you to sort of ponder what that means to own or not own land, especially as New Yorkers. So take a minute to.
We get to go into national parks.
great conversations about ways that we can find connection with the land in our own pockets of the world. I've heard conversations about going to parks and to national parks and to planting trees and to trying to embrace the little moments of nature and the importance thereof of embracing nature. I'd love to continue this conversation and discussing ways that we can connect more with the fruits and vegetables that we consume and how we can connect with our food. So take a couple minutes to think. Yes, Monty. Yes, Monty.
It is very, I guess, interesting that today is actually the day in New York City, everybody has to start their season. And New York,
right, we'll move on to modern commentary. So this is women's commentary. The land, like the people, must have a Sabbath rest, and therefore it must lie fallow every seventh year. The idea may seem like a utopian fantasy, but Baruch Levin points out that letting the land lie fallow was a practical aspect of ancient agriculture, especially where the extensive irrigation was utilized. He explains that it served to reduce the quantity of alkaline, sodium, and calcium deposited in the soil, and thus helped to preserve the land's fertility. Practical considerations aside, for Leviticus, this law expresses the supremacy of God to whom Israel and the land ultimately belong. So as pointed out here, this was the idea of taking care of our land and of prioritizing in this way and giving the land a Sabbath, humanizing it or not, connected us to it, but also ensured that it would continue on. As Jody, we were speaking and you mentioned this importance of preserving for the future. And so I think that is really this idea that you have to preserve for the future. And in order to preserve for the future, you must give the land a rest. You must treat it like a living organism, which it is. I mean, so many living organisms. And so the value there is really important. So thank you for sharing that, Jody. And so we'll continue, or this is my last slide, but some modern ideas. I won't read all of this out for you, but the USDA, where I got all of this information from, has lots of ideas on how to help you keep your soil healthy. And so you should minimize disturbances, you should leave plant residue, which they did. You should make sure there's a diverse crop rotation. You should make sure your livestock grazes at different fields, all of which I find really fascinating that are now modern science and knowledge tells us what somewhat at least was in the Torah, which is that like these ideas of Shemitah sort of come around in this way, and this idea that people knew the land and were connected and figured out, even if they didn't know why, how things worked and made sense. So we'll now take just a couple of minutes for thoughts. We'll pass the microphone. What's come up? What are some things that you're hoping to get more connected to? Any questions that arose? Yeah.
In our group, we were talking a lot about our individual connections to what is produced in the land. I mean, for example, vegetables. We were talking a bit about how we're connected differently to different vegetables and how important they are to, that we know in terms of moving life ahead and all. And so to require ourselves to step back and make sure that we're respectful of the land and using it properly is just an essential thought. So that was really a good way that we started thinking.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
I was going to add to what Linda was saying, that I felt it was not only the trees and the flowers that bloom that materially, nourish us, but also spiritually. There's something vibrant. There's something about relaxing. This sounds so simplistic, but when I go to Trader Joe's, I find almost everybody walking out with flowers, plants, or something. They're good with this, and there must be a reason that it's being so fondly. It nurtures our soul. I think that some of the beauty, not only our bodies but our soul, on a holistic level, possible.
Thank you. I love that. I read somewhere that having plants in your home is really good for your mental health. So I appreciate you bringing that up. Yeah, you can afford a dog. Exactly. A lot less work than a dog. No, I've never walked a plant. Any other thoughts? What's coming up for you? Ways that you're hoping to reconnect with the land? Yeah, Rabbi.
I just think as New York City residents, we can so completely remove ourselves from the land. We don't have to farm it. We we go to supermarkets and everything is there, and we can get whatever we want all year long. And unless you make the choice to go into a park, you can live your entire life in a concrete jungle. So how much more important it is for us in our urban environment to really connect with the land, and at the very least, take a walk through a park or appreciate the tree out front of your house in some way.
Thank you.
First of all, I want to thank you for this fabulous presentation and encouraging the interesting discussions. But to follow on what Rabbi just said about us New Yorkers and how we live in a built environment, and we tend to think that we don't interact with the natural environment, but we do in so many ways. Every time we turn on our water faucet, right? Where does our water come from? The vast reservoir system upstate, right? What happens when we let the water flow down the drain or flush the toilet? Where does that water go? Well, yes, it gets treated, but ultimately it gets discharged to the waters that surround the islands that comprise New York City, except for the Bronx, right? But the Bronx still has a significant waterfront. When we ride the subway, how are we interacting with the natural system, right? Tunnels were built in rock. They're designed to keep water out of those tunnels. How does that impact the flow of groundwater beneath the earth? How does the air that we breathe in those tunnels get there? So we interact with the natural environment in so many ways. Every time we scratch the surface and pour a sidewalk, we've interacted with the natural environment. Instead of the rainwater seeping into the ground, it flows on the surface. How does that affect the natural environment? So we're not farming, right? We're not mining, right? But we are definitely interacting with our natural environment, and we should think about that as we walk through the park, or walk up to Trader Joe's, or swipe our Omni cards and go into the subway.
Thank you.
No more swiping.
And Jules, this is a wonderful time to give this talk because it's spring and we get to see the buds on the trees and new flowers coming up, and it's just such a wonderful time of renewal. So I thank you very much.
So, thank you all for taking the time to consider our environment and consider what our texts have taught us and ways that we can bring it forward and into our own lives. I'm so grateful for all that you've shared. I've learned so much from you all tonight, and I hope that you can continue to think about this and think about the ways that you can bring Torah tangibly into your lives at Trader Joe's or on the subway. Perchance, I know I will now be thinking about that every time I pick up a new potted plant. So thank you all so much, and good night.